Right, so we are recording and live streaming. So everybody should unmute because
Should mute.
should mute because we don't want interruption, interference. So we start here now formally. Let me just take off my phone because that can be a source of interruption as well. Sometimes people call me the same minute. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, namaste, assalamu alaikum. This is the 117th edition, that's 117 of our Zoom public meeting. We wish to sincerely thank all those who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing pan-Indo-Caribbean and pan-Diaspora project. Our chairperson today / tonight, and for some people this morning, is Shakira Mohammed, a teacher for the past 14 years. She has a BA in business management and a BA degree with a focus on special needs education. Shakira is now entering the field of holistic wellness therapies such as Shen and holographic release therapies. Shakira, welcome. Please take over from here.
Thank you, Dr. Mahaber, for the warm welcome. It's always my pleasure. So good night, good morning, good evening, namaste, and assalamu alaikum to all of you, depending where you are all over the world. As Dr. Mahaber said, this is our 117th edition of this public Zoom meeting. And for 116 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. So the past 2 years, 4 months, and 3 weeks, we have featured 384 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 116 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, which is a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. So in order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are asking for you to make your suggestions as well as your donations. You can contact Dr. Mahaber for details. Our moderator this evening / tonight is Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of this Zoom platform. She is also a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. She's a strong advocate for health and wellness practices based on traditional and alternative healing. Shalama, welcome. Please take over.
Thank you so much, Shakira. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste and a very warm welcome to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for choosing to spend this part of your Sunday or your Monday with us. This public meeting now will take the form of a panel discussion. To avoid trolls invading our program, our IT manager, Ravin, has muted everyone and has given permission to the presenters only to share their screens. Presenters are advised not to admit anyone or unmute anyone or allow anyone to share your screens, please. Our meeting today should not exceed 2 hours. And today we'll be discussing the role of Indo-Trinidadians in achieving independence for Trinidad and Tobago in 1962. So why this particular topic? This Wednesday, Trinidad and Tobago will celebrate its 60th anniversary of political independence from Great Britain, an event which took place on August 31st, 1962. Of Chinese origin, Sir Solomon Ho Choi was appointed as the country's first Governor General then. Afro-Trinidadian Dr. Eric Williams was appointed the Prime Minister, with his People's National Movement, the PNM, forming the first independent government. But what of Indo-Trinidadians? Indo-Trinidadians formed the second largest ethnic group in the Twin Island. What role did their political leaders play in achieving independence for Trinidad and Tobago in 1962? Should Dr. Eric Williams alone be given credit? Who were the unsung heroes of the Indian community who helped place safeguards in the independent constitution? For 60 years, the name of the opposition leader of the Democratic Labour Party, Dr. Rudranath Kapildev, has hardly even been mentioned. So what of the role of others such as Ashwat Shastri Sinanan, opposition leader of the federal parliament from 1958 to 1961. And what of Tajmul Hussain, Lionel Frank Sukaran, Stephen Murad, Sambhunath Kapildev, Vernon Jamada, H.P. Singh, Ramprasad Bolai, Balgobin Ramdeen, and Jang Bahadur Singh? Ladies and gentlemen, let us now hear from our panel of distinguished speakers. And we begin today with Dr. John Barrett, who is 95 years old. Congratulations, sir. He's the longest living politician of that independence era. Dr. Barrett is a retired dental surgeon and a former member of parliament for St. Augustine from 1966 to 1971 under the leadership of Dr. Rudranath Kapildev of the opposition Democratic Labour Party. It is indeed an honor to have you on our platform, sir. Please go ahead. You have 15 minutes for your presentation. Dr. Barrett, please unmute your mic. We're not hearing you.
Yes, sir, unmute.
Dr. Barrett?
Oh.
Yeah, just look to the left of your screen, sir. Look to the left of your screen where you see a microphone icon and just click on that. Not the keyboard, you want to look at your screen, please.
There you go.
Okay, great. Yes, he's unmuted now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a great pleasure and honor for Dr. Mahabir to get in touch with me while I'm in Linden at the present time. I'm hoping to be in Trinidad tomorrow, but I am speaking to the community from London this afternoon.
Recording in progress.
Yes. I am very grateful, as I said, but I want to make one request to the guests and the listeners who are listening. At my age of nearly 96, which I'll be in 2 or 3 months' time, so I ask for your forgiveness from the inception of my contribution. So if there is any omission or any problems that you get with me speaking, please forgive me, as I am now nearly 96 years old. I want to thank you very much in advance for listening to me this evening. As the moderator already mentioned so many things about the people who were responsible for independence. She have actually taken a lot of words out of my mouth. But I will try my best to remember, as far as I can concern, the era in which I served or which I was involved. I am now at the age where I have been lived through 2 centuries, you know. In the 19th century, when I was born in 1927, and now in the 20th century, when I'm speaking to you on this day in 1922. Ladies and gentlemen, the road to independence was not an easy one, because there were many trials and tribulations, and there were many people who were trying to do their best to have an independence constitution written. So we had quite a lot of trials and errors. And remember that those trials and errors started in approximately, I think from the year 1946 or something like that. We are in a position today where we can say that we are very honored to be given independence by the Queen. As you know, when she made her final speech about giving us independence, she made it quite clear that she was no longer responsible of looking after the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And during that period, when the flag of Trinidad and Tobago was lifted prior to the flag of British colonial government, while that was lowering, many people were very joyful that a new black, red, white, and black flag was being hoisted. What a great moment for us in Trinidad and Tobago, where I was also present to witness this very momentous occasion. However, as the politics played out, we found that Dr. Eric Williams, who was a brilliant scholar and who attended Oxford University, he was able to get his PhD in history. And therefore, he became a historian of wealth and recognized, especially in the Western diaspora. I had an opportunity to read certain parts of his book, Inner Hunger. And many times I wondered whether what I was reading was referring to the Indo-Trinidadians. Because you see, Indo-Trinidadians also had their leader. And that leader was the illustrious son, whose name was Dr. Rudranath Kapildeo, a very close friend of mine and the leader of my party. So as we enter into how did we get independence, we go back to Marlborough House, and the story is well known that the constitution that was presented at Marlborough House by the PNM government did not find favor with the opposition leader, Dr. Rudranath Kapildeo. And therefore, they had to go back and forth at Marlborough House with both legal minds, the brilliant minds of Sir Ellis Clark and that of Mr. Tajmul Hussain. Of course, we all know he was considered one of the most brightest and recognized senior counsels in the Commonwealth. I speak of Mr. Tajmul Hussain, who also visited Marlborough House with Dr. Kapildeo. Now, I will just refer to my notes here as I ask for your forgiveness. I can't remember everything, so I made a couple notes here in what I had. Now, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, as we know, were all basically from the African nation and from the Indians. But there were two different kinds of people. One was very unfortunate to have been slaves and suffered a great deal. The others, after slavery was removed, the British needed other workers on their sugarcane industry, cocoa and coffee. So they decided to look in the British Empire where they could have got cheap Indian labor. And lo and behold, India, a country of vast people, they decided to get the people from Bihar who were agriculturists to come to Trinidad, amongst others, of course, on the boat of the Fatal Resort, some from Fiji, Mauritius, Africa, and other parts of the diaspora, which the British controlled. So fortunately or unfortunately, in my mind, I thought that when the Indians arrived in Trinidad and the conditions under which they were serving, to my mind, that was also considered by me as pseudo-slavery, as opposed to the slavery which the Africans underwent. I might be wrong, I must be forgiven if I think that way, but the conditions under which the Indians worked, the hardships that they had to go through, under the conditions, the harsh conditions where they lived, I feel that I'm justified in saying they too lived under a pseudo culture of slavery. Now, what are the contributions that were made by those of my forefathers, those of the Indo-Caribbean, in the Indo-Caribbean island? There were Hindus, Muslims, Christians. So I categorize all as Indians who came. When they arrived here, they were also sent into various areas by the people who bought them, and they were divided into lots of different estates in Trinidad and Tobago. We know of the estate in Diego Martin, where some of my great-grandparents came from, Orange Grove, Caroni, down south. And these Indians were scattered, but they lived under very harsh conditions. They could not communicate with their people who traveled with them as their Jahaji Bhais and Jahaji Bahins. So they were restricted in their movement. And I think restricting one in their movements and in the condition which they live, that to me is pseudo-slavery. I now move on forward to what the contributions in my mind that the Indians made. One, they were the agriculturers, and they are the ones who produced the wealth that the British took and built the British Empire that was left. Sugar was king at the time. Cocoa was also considered to be king at the time. And our forefathers labored in those fields for many years, making their contributions, building the economy, planting the lands, and eventually, after their indentured laborship was expired, some returned, but many took the option, which was £5 sterling as a reward. Those who took the 5 shillings went back, and those who didn't take the 5 shillings decided to accept a couple, I think it's 2 acres of land. Now, the type of people that remained were very ingenious, educated, even in their own language, but they knew about agriculture, and they continued to become agricultural workers, supplying food for the country of Trinidad and Tobago. food, which was enjoyed by all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, when we eventually got our independence in 1962, it was a battle that was fought for many years prior to that. There were trial runs, of course, where different parties tried to organize. But it so happened that when it was granted to us, I felt that under the conditions which it was granted and which the PNM party, which was in power, when they divided the spoils, I asked myself, who are the people who benefited by independence? And as one of your speakers said a couple minutes ago, I remember clearly Dr. Eric Williams became the Prime Minister, and he had the authority to do what he wanted with putting people in places. Of course, he didn't put Sir Solomon Ho Choi, who was a Chinese. Of course, Dr. Williams was an African. And again, you ask the question, where was Dr. Capaldi put in that category? To my mind, none. He was never recognized. Although Dr. Williams was a brilliant scholar, brilliant student, I think Dr. Capaldi was just as or better qualified on the international world as a scientist of note, a mathematician, and also a barrister at law. So we asked the question, nothing was given to Capaldi, he is never recognized, and up to his death, he was hardly recognized. And I remember well, he was rejected twice by the people of this country when he offered himself to continue his political affairs. We have many Indo-Trinidadians who made great contributions. They made it in agriculture, they made it in the construction industry. I'm going to just call a few names. One of the persons who I think did a lot for the industry, the construction industry, was a good friend of mine, Mr. Motilal Moonan. Motilal Moonan was one of the first to start building roads, cutting down mountains, having many other companies, and also being one of those persons who was able to employ many, many Afro-Trinidadians and Indo-Trinidadians in the construction industry. We talk about the Caroni. Caroni, after they were closed down, many people got jobs on the cocoa estate in places like Manzanilla, Sandy Grande, and Couva, and different places. Many Indians went back to agriculture, which they knew best. Education. Bade Sagan Maharaj was the one who was able to put schools where the workers on the field from all the various estates, he made sure he put schools in those areas from where many, many people are today as a product of the schools that produced by Mr. Maharaj, the Mahasabha. It is well known that those students have studied well and have done well doctors, lawyers, magistrates, many professions. So the Indians have contributed, even in the fishing industry. Fishermen, most of them were Indians, and they collected the fish and sold it to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So we know that the contribution to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago was heavily built by the Indo-Trinidadians of this country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bharat. I hate to interrupt you. I feel you have more to say. Unfortunately, we need to bring our second speaker on because he has to leave shortly. So would you mind just staying with us, please?
Yes, I will stay, and possibly I might answer some questions if people think that they could ask me. It's an honor to remain to listen to your panel.
Thank you very much, Sue. We really appreciate all that you've contributed thus far. And at this time, I will bring on our second speaker. Thank you again.
Thank you, my dear.
So, ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker is Dr. Brinsley Samaru. He's Professor Emeritus of History at the University of the West Indies. He's a former senator, minister, and member of parliament for River in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, Dr. Samaru. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're unmuted,
Yep,
and
right.
Robin will bring up your slides.
Right, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased that I was preceded by my very good friend, Dr. Bharat. And John, we are looking forward very much to the launch of your biography, which I'm sure you'll agree with me has been written, a very good biography written by Premnath Gupta. So we hope to have you here in Trinidad very soon so we can have a big launch of that particular book. I'm very glad that Dr. Bharat mentioned Tajmul Hussain in the first part of his remarks. And I'm very glad that he, as a colleague of Tajmul Hussain, recognized the important role that Tajmul Hussain played. He was a match, a really good match for Ellis Clark, who was representing the government. So in the world of politics, the person who is remembered is he who makes the most noise, grabbing the headlines for most of the time. The public prefers sensationalism rather than quiet brilliance. Tajmul Hussain has almost disappeared from the historical record because he never pushed himself forward like most politicians do. He was very, very quiet. Tajmul Hussain was very influential in the shaping of our independence constitution. And as I will demonstrate in a little while, in the constitution that came later on, that is the 1976 Republican Constitution. Many of the freedoms which we enjoy today were enshrined in the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago because of Tajmul's learned persistence. I want to repeat that, learned persistence, which came to the fore in the debates preceding independence, which came to the fore in these debates in Port of Spain, go on to the next one, in Port of Spain as well as in London. Well, first of all, just to make a few comments about the antecedents of Tajmul Hussain. He was born in Williamsville, that very small village in South Trinidad in the sugar belt. He had his primary education in Williamsville at the Presbyterian School, and then his secondary education in San Fernando. And after that secondary education, he became a self-taught and a self-made man through private study. As an external student at London University, he obtained his BA honors in history and economics. He also obtained his LLB in constitutional law from London University. And that is very important for the role that he had to play later on in the shaping of the Trinidad and Tobago Constitution. In 1961, could you go on to the next slide? In 1961, he was elected to the Chaguanas constituency for the DLP. But let me say something I missed out just a little while ago. In 1946, he went to London, where he was called to the bar in 1947. Okay, 1961, he was elected to the Chaguanas constituency, where he stayed until 1966. In that election, the PNM won 20 seats with the voting machines. So the PNM won 20 seats and the DLP won 10 seats. After the 1961 election, the PNM, not Trinidad and Tobago, the PNM decided that the federation, which had started in 1958, was now dead. It only had to be declared dead in 1962. And because the federation was virtually dead, the PNM decided that the country would go along for independence from the British. This the PNM did without any reference to the opposition. Under public pressure, the government convened a public convention at Queen's Hall in late April 1962. At that conference, it was decided that the government and the opposition would proceed to London, where the British government would be the final arbiter in the devising of the Constitution. Tajmul told me in 1966 that neither he nor the DLP were invited to the Queen's Hall conference, but as citizens and as the leading opposition in the parliament, they decided to go. And that is where Tajmul started to speak. And then he continued that speaking, that learned speaking in London in Marlborough House from the 28th of May to the 8th of June, 1962. So those are two important dates that we have to bear in mind. One, the Queen's Hall Conference, April 1962, and the Marlborough Conference, which followed the Queen's Hall Conference. Tajmul Hussain was the major opposition spokesman. He was able to successfully argue for the enactment of guarantees in the 1962 Constitution, guarantees for fundamental rights in Trinidad and Tobago. One can say that Tajmul Hussain was the one who devised the Trinidad and Tobago Bill of Rights, as I will demonstrate in a little while. Tajmul's Bill of Rights, which he spoke about both in the Queen's Hall Conference and in the Marlborough Conference, ensured that in the Constitution there would be a number of guarantees. For example, that the government could not change anything in the Constitution without a 3/5 majority. That is what Tajmul's doing. That the judiciary shall be free of political interference, that a boundaries commission and an electoral commission shall be established. Both of these were established, that's the boundaries commission and the elections commission in the 1962 Constitution, but Tajmul continued even after he left politics. And then those who were involved in the Marlborough Conference remember what Tajmul had said. So in the 1976 Republican Constitution, both of these institutions, that is the Boundaries Commission and the Elections Commission, were merged together to form the 1976 Electoral and Boundaries Constitution. But Tajmul had an effect in constitutional change long after 1962. His Bill of Rights ensured equality of treatment from public authorities in the exercise of the functions of these public authorities, freedom of movement, and the protection by law of the rights of the individual. His advocacy of the appointment of a director of public prosecutions was deferred at the Marlborough Conference. But again, the constitution makers did not forget that one Tajmul Hussain had said in 1962 that we have to have a director of public prosecution, and that becomes enshrined in the 1976 Republican Constitution. So I would just take a few minutes, to read from Taj Mahal's presentation at the Marlborough House Conference. Now let me say, before I read what he said at the Marlborough House Conference, that Taj Mahal was such a good politician that all the documentation that he produced and the presentation that he gave at the Queen's Hall Conference and at the Marlborough House Conference didn't end with Taj Mahal. He made sure that the British government, which was the arbiter, between government and opposition, obtained everything that he wrote or he said, so that the PNM, if they wished to obfuscate, to push out what Taj Mahal had said, that was their business. But he made it sure that this received as wide publicity as possible throughout the Caribbean and in Britain in publicizing his recommendations, both at the Marlborough House Conference and in the British press. So I just want to read one paragraph from his presentation at the Marlborough House Conference, where he's addressing the Secretary of State for the Colonies, who was the chairman. Mr. Chairman, our objective is to have a constitution which would ensure the preservation of democracy in our country after independence. We want a judiciary which is independent. We want provisions which really guarantee effectively the rights and freedoms which ought to exist in a democratic society. We want a parliament democratically constituted. We want a procedure for the amendment of the Constitution which effectively protects us from the arbitrary exercise of power to amend. We want the various commissions so constituted as to ensure that they function efficiently and impartially. Further, we want, above all, provision made to ensure free and fair elections in our country, so that all the suspicion and fear which now exists in Trinidad and Tobago in this regard could be removed. So he was speaking, right up to the moment and talking about the then current problems in the country, and saying in this statement, a lot of which he derived from the Canadian Bill of Rights. So as I said earlier, he was quite a scholar, an excellent researcher, and it is because of that scholarship and that continuous presentation of his points that so much of the Constitution, the human rights sections of the Constitution was enshrined in the 1962 Constitution, and as I've said, some of it in the 1976 Republican Constitution. Now, Taj Mahal also raised at great length the question of the voting machines, which were used in the 1961 elections. And again, he publicized all the work that he was doing. Taj Mahal Hussein went to the United States of America. He went as a person who was just interested, not telling them who he was, but he went to the Shoup company in the US, which made these voting machines. And he did a considerable amount of research in the manner, and the people who were making the machines explained to him how these machines could be rigged. And so in the same way that he obtained the Bill of Rights in the 1962 Constitution in Trinidad, he publicized all of the fraudulences that could take place with the voting machines, which, as I said, he demonstrated by going there and looking at the machines himself and getting. So he had piles and piles of information which he presented at the Queen's Hall Conference on the voting machines, at the Marlborough Conference, and as widely as possible in Britain. Now, the response of the Colonial Office to his very learned presentations about the voting machines, the response was that that is an internal matter, and we in England are not going to interfere with that. That is something that you should do when you go back to Trinidad. So what the British government is that they just shelved what they considered to be a hot potato and pushed it further down the road and said quite clearly that we are not going to arbitrate in this matter, that you should do that in Trinidad. And so Taj Mahal continued the campaign for the rest of his stay in London. And as I said, he presented very, very extensive argument at the Marlborough Conference against the voting machine. But he made sure that Britain understood quite clearly how these machines could become fraudulent, how we don't want these machines in Trinidad and Tobago again. And it is as a result of his and other agitators' continuous persistence that the voting machines disappeared after that 1961 elections. And from 1966 onwards, we had voting by the ballot box. So that the victory obtained by forces of the opposition in getting rid of the voting machine was very much as a result of that persistent, learned research that Taj Mahal Hussain continuously did, and he succeeded. Today, we take for granted many of these Bill of Rights provisions that are enshrined in the Constitution, because we have an independent judiciary, we have a free press. No one can change the Constitution without a 3/5 majority, and so on. A lot of these things that we enjoy today and that we take for granted were not there when the Constitution was being framed, and could not have been taken for granted at that time, but they were put into the Constitution largely because of the agitation of Taj Mahal Hussain. In fact, I could mention, he told me this in 1996, that Eric Williams was so impressed with his arguments at Queen's Hall and at Marlborough that after Taj Mahal got out of politics and became a private citizen after 1966, Eric Williams employed him, that is Taj Mahal Hussain, to advise him, Eric Williams, on a lot of legal matters, such was the admiration that Eric Williams himself had for Taj Mahal Hussain. So at a time when racial tension was high in Trinidad and Tobago, when a number of leading politicians were talking about partitioning Trinidad, Taj Mahal did not identify himself or parade himself as an Indian activist or as a person who was concerned only about rights for the Indian population. And I think that is very important, because in this regard, he was like Adrian Cola Renzi, who was his predecessor, in which they didn't see race, they saw people, they saw Trinbagonians. And I think that is what distinguishes both Adrian Cola Renzi and Taj Mahal Hussain as champions for the people, all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, I end by saying a lot of the things that we now take for granted were really wrought for us, were really achieved for us by the learned persistence and the excellence in research done by Taj Mahal Hussain. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samaru. As always, a very, very informative presentation. And you've just reminded us that there are always unsung heroes among us that we need to recognize. Thanks again. Would you be able to stay for some questions? I think
Yes.
you needed. Yes?
Yeah. I'll try to stay as long as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now move on to our third speaker, and that is Attorney Leela Ramdeen. She's the daughter of Balgobin Ramdeen, a former member of parliament in the first independent parliament. Balgobin Ramdeen was a member of the Democratic Labour Party for Karali East from 1961 to 1966. Ms. Ramdeen is with us, but we will play a pre-recorded presentation, and then we will have our fourth speaker. After our fourth speaker, we will go ahead and take questions for her, as well as for Dr. Samaru and Dr. Bharat. Can we have that presentation, please, Robin?
Greetings. As we prepare to observe our 60th anniversary of independence, let us thank God for our freedom from colonial rule. I pay tribute today to my deceased father, Balgobin Ramdeen, a third-generation citizen of East Indian origin who played a part in our journey to independence. According to genealogist Shamsuddin, past paternal great-grandparents, Madhuri and Usaran, arrived from India on the ship the Edith Moore on 6th of December, 1858, and were sent to the Mount Pleasant, Cunupia estate as indentured workers. Sudial, one of their 6 children, was Pa's grandfather. The family worked hard and pooled their resources. In those days, cocoa was king, and they owned many cocoa estates in east of Trinidad. 2 of the 3 large houses the Dials built, including the one where Pa was born in 1925, still stand in San Chiquito. The descendants of the Dial, Ramdeen, and Ramdeen families have accomplished much in various fields of endeavor. Here are extracts from an interview with Pa for the Parliamentary Personalities TV channel.
As a young man growing up in a quiet village in Trinidad, Balgobin Ramdeen was actively involved in his community, making positive contributions toward building a better society in Trinidad and Tobago.
Balgobin Ramdeen was a young man of vision when he started writing and when he entered the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. A man of greatest integrity, a man committed to Trinidad and Tobago. And later on, when he completed his training in the law and returned to practice in Trinidad and Tobago, there was always this overwhelming desire for the welfare of Trinidad and Tobago. That has been his mantra.
Because of the fact that he was a paid government servant, either as teacher or as public officer, he could not publish under his own name. For a good decade, he wrote under a number of pseudonyms, such as Nemesis, Revelation, Iconoclast, and then there was one finally he latched onto, which is Cassandra.
Some debaters and some parliamentarians depend on their skills to speak and their use of words without content. Not Balgobin Ramdeen. He researched.
Both Sukaran and Balgobin Ramdeen read extensively. They combed the libraries in Trinidad, and then they bought books through correspondence from British publishers and Russian publishers and Indian publishers.
And this country, for the sake of the aggrandizement of certain individuals in political office, is going downhill, and the poverty of the people is growing greater and greater and greater. We don't have a proper health service, we don't have a proper road service in agricultural areas, we don't have a proper education system, or no other school has been built. The whole of this attitude that we have, that it's a grab for power, and it is based on race appeal on both sides, that unless we stop this stupidity and this madness, our children will pay a price. The wealth, the natural wealth of this country is not for the present generation. We hold it on trust for the generations to come. We are the trustees, we are not the owners, and it cannot be squandered by the present generation, by the present regime, at the expense of the generations to come.
Balgobin Ramdeen continues to express his dedication and love for his country by connecting with others through his writings, his daily interactions, and his unselfish sense of duty to assist when called upon in any and every way he possibly can.
In one of Paz's 5 short books, Untold Tales of Politics and Politicians, one gets an insight into the challenges that inter-ethnic strife created in the lead up to independence. Sadly, such strife continues to adversely impact nation building today. As Professor Rhoda Reddock said at a conference, we see everything through the prism of race. Let's reflect briefly on our history. After slavery, emancipated slaves had rightly refused to continue to work on the sugar plantations for a measly sum. Workers were brought from China, Spain, Portugal, but they could not survive the rigors and heat of the plantation. Between 1845 and 1917, 147,592 Indians were brought from India to work as indentured workers on sugar plantations owned by the British. The indenture contract was an exploitative one. The treatment of Indians under indentureship was inhumane. Pa told us that his fight for TT's independence was part of his abhorrence of colonialism. He married his childhood sweetheart, Ruby Manning, who was of African origin, and they had 7 children, including myself. As a child, I remember the faded copy of Tagore's Gitanjali 35 that he had displayed above his desk. It expresses what Tagore considered to be true freedom, his dream of a free India. On India's independence in 1947, Pa, who was the chair of the Indian youth movement in Sangre Grande, organized a march through the streets. He also yearned for TT's freedom from colonial rule. The journey to our independence included the task of educating the public about the value of self-determination. Pa sought to do this through his writings. As Professor Brinsley Samaru said in the foreword of Pa's book, The Writings of Cassandra, Ramdeen focused on the local situation, but against a universal background. Our own issues were not unique, and we must learn how others tackle these same issues of corruption, competition for power, allowance for the development of democratic institutions, and ethnic rivalry. Again and again, Ramdeen pointed out the futility of ethnic rivalry and its tendency to detract from the real problems of development. His appeals at that time were cries in the wilderness. And in the foreword to Pa's book, Untold Tales of Politics and Politicians, Professor John Laguerre said, Ramdeen is clearly one of the early thinkers to have emerged from the Indian community, along with C.B. Mathura, A.C. Rienzi, F.E.M. Hussain, C. Prasad Naipaul, and others. He is an important member of the early Indian intelligentsia. Some of the issues he and they raised are still with us. I grew up listening to Pa's complaints about the fact that that Hindu and Muslim marriages had not been recognized by the state in TT for many years. When the men in these families died, their property went to the state, bona vacancia. The children of these unions were considered to be illegitimate. Hindu marriages were not recognized as legal until May 1946, and Muslim marriages were not recognized until December 1964. In the early years of indentureship, the law stated that one could only vote if one could read and write. Many Indians were denied adult suffrage since many were unable to read and write. Indians only gained adult suffrage in 1946. In 1953, Bade Sagan Maharaj merged with other Indians to form the People's Democratic Party, the PDP. After losing to the PNM in 1956, the PDP merged with Albert Gomes to form the Democratic Labour Party, the DLP. The DLP defeated the PNM in the 1958 West Indian federal elections, winning 6 of the 10 seats. Bade built many schools to support the upward mobility of Indians through education. As a young man, Pa was present at many of Bade's meetings, sharing his views about positive action that should be taken to promote equity and equality for Indians. In 1958, a Federation of the West Indies was formed, but fell apart when Jamaica withdrew in 1961 and gained independence on 6 of August 1962. Trinidad and Tobago decided to go the same route and work towards gaining independence. Pa entered into politics and was selected by the DLP, led by Dr. Rudranath Kapildev, to contest the seat for Carinese, one of the largest constituencies in which a large proportion of Indians resided. I recall the fear that filled the hearts of my mother, my siblings, and I during the 1961 election campaign. We feared that my father would be hurt in the violence that characterized the campaign. Inter alia, Pa's campaign highlighted the need for his constituents to have access to basic amenities. Here's a quote from the US Library of Congress about that election. The December 1961 election was characterized by the use of racial appeals by both parties. Pro-PNM supporters broke up the LP meetings with stone throwing. The government declared a state of emergency in areas where East Indians were the majority and called out 3,000 police. 88% of the voters turned out for the December 61 election in a vote that largely followed ethnic lines. Williams and the PNM won 57%, reflecting the ethnic split. Williams filled 12 cabinet slots with 8 blacks, 2 whites, and 2 East Indians, 1 Christian and 1 Muslim. Appointees for the newly created Senate followed similar lines. As Trinidad and Tobago faced independence, the black middle class was firmly in power. On Friday, 29 December 1961, the House of Representatives and Senate sat for the first time in the history of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. PNM had won 20 seats and DLP had won 10 of the 30 seats in the House of Representatives. Pa often spoke about the pride he felt at the stroke of midnight on the 30th of August 1962. As an MP, he stood with my mother among the dignitaries in front of our Parliament building and watched as the Union Jack was lowered and our red, white, and black flag was raised and fluttered in the breeze. Pa was honored by the Trinidad and Tobago's National Council of Indian Culture and by Mr. Ewart Williams, the then governor of TT Central Bank, on 15 May 2012 at the launch of an exhibition commemorating 50 years of independence. The event was entitled Trinidad and Tobago Journey to Independence. As he launched the exhibition, Ewart Williams said, "Today we take special pride in recognizing 3 patriots who were members of Parliament on that historic day, 31st of August 1962. They are Mr. Kamaluddin Mohammed, Mr. A.N.R. Robinson, and Mr. Balgobin Ramdeen. We are particularly pleased to have Mr. Balgobin Ramdeen as one of our special guests." Pa, a former MP, retired barrister at law and an attorney at law, and author, died in London in December 2016. As we celebrate TT's independence, let's acknowledge that we will only achieve our goals as a free nation when we view our diversity as a source of strength. I am proud of my mixed heritage. I believe that it is possible to have unity and harmony in diversity. This Independence Day, let us reflect on what we have done and can do with our independence. Happy Independence Day.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ramdeen. That was quite an insight into your father, and we really appreciate all that you shared. We will have some questions for you coming soon. Very informative. Thanks again. Ladies and gentlemen, let me bring on our 4th speaker now, and this is Dr. Kirk Mayhew, a former university lecturer of political science and a former temporary independent senator. He is now the public relations officer of the opposition United National Congress Party. Welcome, sir. Go ahead, please. You're still muted. Ravin, can you unmute him, please? Good.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right, good. Yes, well, welcome. Well, thank you. And I'd like greetings to everybody this afternoon. My presentation is actually going to, after listening to the other 3, and which I'm very grateful for and got a lot of insight from. However, I must say that my presentation is going to be quite different. I do not take a celebratory approach to the way we got independence and our independence itself. And I think that we need to set the record straight. There are a lot of myths, a lot of PNM myths about independence, that if we don't get straight, we will remain on the path, the bad path that we've taken since independence. I've just released a little meme I made last night, showing how in 1960, for example, Hong Kong, Trinidad, and Singapore were at the same level in terms of GDP per capita. And now when you look at now, Singapore is over 72,000 US per person, Hong Kong at 49,000 per person, Trinidad at 15,000 per person. And there's a whole, and we started off with more natural resources and so forth. And and the way we got independence has a lot to do with that. And the PNM dominance since that independence has been crucial. That 50 years of rule was engineered in that independence process, which we need to take a look at critically. So here are some of the shibboleths that I will be destroying or attempting to in my presentation. And I will say that, you know, it's outlined in my book very much in Politics in a Half-Made Society, Political History of Trinidad from 1925 to 2001. That's still available on Amazon. And also, because the Constitution, I must disagree. Our Constitution is terrible, and it is a PNM creation. We are living under a PNM Constitution, which reversed many. Our Constitution of 1955-56 was more advanced than the Constitution we have now, democratically. Eric Williams pushed us back. And the book I wrote with Peter Jamadar, who is Vernon Jamadar's son, who was the head of the DLP after, on democracy and constitution reform, outlines a lot of the background of that. I've written on Capildeo before in the Queen's Royal College 100th anniversary book. I wrote a chapter on Capildeo explaining my very negative views of his legacy. My view is that he was a disaster for Trinidad and Tobago, a disaster for the opposition, and a disaster for the Indian community. And one book I want to plug that is not my own, but it's very, very important to understand this alternative history, this hidden history. This book, published by, I believe, Kumar Mahabir did publish this, the Indian Review Press publication, H.P. Singh, and the Indian Struggle for Justice and Equality Against Black Racism in Trinidad and Tobago from 1956 to 1962. A very, very, very important book. And they were at Marlborough House as well. And that is very important. The betrayal at Marlborough House, we have to look at very squarely and not gloss over it and not pretend that it didn't happen, which is what we have been doing since then. There was a betrayal of the country, So with that aside, if you want to hear more, because I'll just give the barest outlines here, given the time, but it's fully explained and documented in those books that I just read. But one, we did not fight for independence, right? There was no independence struggle in Trinidad and Tobago. It's not like India or the US or Haiti or Cuba. The British wanted to get rid of us. What there was a struggle for was the terms independence would happen on and who was going to rule once the British left. But we weren't fighting the British. The British were pushing us out. That is a PNM narrative, right? That I reject, and we don't owe the PNM anything for our independence, not at all, right? In fact, they've made a mess of our independence. I've heard persons speak about the joyful nature, at independence and so forth. Other people that I've spoken to from around that time, and even the great C.L.R. James, C.L.R. James famously wrote that Trinidadians approached independence like they were going to a funeral. It wasn't a celebration. So there is that other opinion. Lloyd Best used to tell me the same thing, and so forth as well. So this idea of glossing over our independence and what happened then needs to be reviewed. Also, I want to also talk about I suppose, undermine, the idea that Indians are a monolithic group, because Indians are not. And it wasn't Africans on one side and Indians on another side. On the PNM side, you had Ibn Mosahem, Kamaluddin Muhammad, Winston Mahabir. These were Indian leaders. So it's not correct or accurate to say that, Indian leaders were on one side and African leaders were on the other. No, there were Indian leaders in the PNM who led, Indians as well, and who were on that side. I can even mention, in my own case, my mother's Mamu was PNM candidate for Nariva for many years, and we have former candidate for MP for Nariva here, Brinsley Samaru, and that's the Munan. So that was S.R. Munan, who was the candidate then, right? So so there was so we have to have a more complicated view of our history as well, and the whole ethnicity and politics there. So the opposition DLP, however, now they were, to try to give you a summary view, they were opposed to the terms on which Eric Williams was seeking independence. Right? He sought to subvert everything, all the constitutional development that was happening from 1925 right up to 55. It was very progressive, very progressive. And what Williams introduced from 1959 was backward. It sought to centralize power, whereas the constitutional development that was occurring, and we had self-government in 1950, right? It wasn't independence, it was self-government. And we had Ajoda Singh, Norman Tang, Albert Gomes, Victor Bryan, and there's one other person I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Roy Joseph, that's the other one. Right, so and these are the ministers there. A Syrian, a Chinese, a Hindu, Creole, Victor Bryan of Afro, mixed, and Albert Gomes, Portuguese, French Creole, etc. So a very mixed government we had before, which when Eric Williams came in, he's made sure we've wiped them out of history. Right? That is the nature of the PNM rule. And what they were doing is reversing, as I said, the progress that Trinidad and Tobago was made. And the opposition DLP were vehemently opposed to it. The Queen's Hall Conference, which Professor Samaru rightly mentioned and importantly mentioned, was very important. And what was so important about that is that opposition voices were shut down at that conference. The DLP actually walked out because I can't remember if it was Ellis Clark who actually chaired it. It may have been, or it may have been somebody else. It might have been Thomas Ross. I can't remember which one chaired it, but whoever the chair was PNM. And they shut, just like in the parliament today, how Bridget Annie said George would just shut everything down. And so the DLP walked out. And interestingly, another group that walked out was the African National Congress of John Brooms, right, who also felt that Williams was autocratic and the PNM were dictatorial, and he felt the exact same way, and he left as well on that conference. And so what was being pushed down the throats of this country was a PNM constitution. And H.P. Singh, and one of the persons who was involved in the Indian Association of Trinidad and Tobago, who became perhaps the most illustrious member of this organization, was Kenneth Lala. And they had an alternative constitution to what the PNM had proposed. The DLP had proposed 113 amendments, all of which were rejected. So many had to do with the Representation of the People Act, the merging of the elections commissions with the boundary commission, because then it ended up with all sorts of gerrymandering of constituencies, the introduction of the voting machine. And so while I respect Taj Mahal Hussein's achievement of bringing in the Bill of Rights finally into our Constitution, because it wasn't there in 1961, but the PNM got around it by putting in the voting machines. So for example, in 58, the DLP got a majority of seats of 6-4. That's what it was in that election. That was the federal elections. Then in 59, in the county council elections, the DLP actually beat the PNM. So how in 1961, with the voting machines, with all the documentation on how it could be rigged, did the PNM get a 2/3 majority, and then get another 2/3 majority in 1966, and then in 71 they got all seats because of the boycott. But during that time, then all those protections were just theoretical because the PNM had a clear route now to have institutions that were supposed to be independent on paper, but in reality were totally dominated by the PNM, the judiciary, the police force, the military, all the so-called watchdog institutions and independent institutions, which were supposed to act as a curb on centralized power, which is what the PNM and Eric Williams stood for. And that leaves us to today to have to struggle against those failures at independence. We still have to take on that challenge, that struggle that the PNM had imposed on us at independence. And, you know, reading the account of Peter Farquhar, who was one of the members with Tajmul Hussain, a DLP representative at Marlborough House, of course, H.P. Singh's recollections as well, and even Eric Williams in his autobiography, Inward Hunger. Now, when they talk about what was going on at Marlborough House, there was both sides were in a deadlock because the DLP were not conceding to the PNM's constitution and that we would be independent under this centralized constitution, which would give Eric Williams all this power. And they were not conceding. There was no progress being made. Williams says this, Farquhar says this, H.V. Singh says this, and they were there. I don't know how the Indian Association were there because they aren't a political party, but they were there at Marlborough. That's something I need to find out. And if anybody can help me here, that would be great because I need to fill that blank in the historical record. But they were there as well. And what happened? What happened was there was a tea break, right? And at the tea break, two QRC old boys, Williams and Capildeo, went outside together. And then when they came back, what the DLP contingent has said, I believe Tajmul Hussain also has said it in his memoir, that they were shocked because Capildeo agreed. Capildeo agreed. And one of the things Peter Farquhar said was that Williams was so desperate to get independence by in August 1962, because Jamaica had it in August 1st, 1962. And then there was a Commonwealth Heads of Government conference later on. And Williams did not want to be showed up by Bustamante and not be present at that, right? So this is Farquhar's reading of what happened in that situation. Now, so Capildeo essentially sold out the DLP side and thereby sold out the country. And for what? And for what? What it is speculated, we can't say for sure, but what the facts seem to point to is that Capildeo could go ahead and teach at the University of London while remaining an MP and the leader of opposition and collecting those salaries and retaining that position while not being there and not doing his job. And this left basically Eric Williams with no opposition because the opposition was totally emasculated, headless, leaderless. And while the independent institutions of our new country was being built, there was no effective opposition because Capildeo was in London. And then that not only happened from 61 to 66, then in 66 again, and then they deposed him and put in Vernon Jamadah after. But even that whole time, there was all these leadership struggles with Simbu, and then Farquhar, and then broke off, and Tajmul and made the Liberal Party, and the Workers' and Farmers' Party came later with Stephen Maraj. But it was a total mess. And that comes, I believe, from the Marlborough House negotiation, where the country was sold out and it's been left to us to this day to fix that mess of a constitution that we inherited. The same thing happened in 76 when we had no opposition in parliament. PNM had 36 seats. They imposed a constitution, which was totally different from what the Wooden Constitution was. The Wooden Constitution was a very progressive document. And the 76 Constitution was essentially the same thing as the 62 Constitution, which was the PNM Constitution, which concentrated power under Eric Williams. And so the role of Indians in independence was mixed, right? I'm concluding here. It was mixed. There were some Indians that were part of the PNM and wanted this and supported it and pushed it. And then there were others in the DLP and others who were fighting against it, like H.P. Singh, like most of the people in the DLP. And then there was Kapildeo, who had a disastrous effect and whose legacy has been terrible for the country, and which we, as a country, have to still fix. We have to fix the mess that was given to us at independence by this betrayal. That's the end of my presentation.
Excellent, Kirk. Thank you so very much for sharing that. It's a unique perspective, and I'm glad that we've had this balance in the presentations. So while we've been talking about the different personalities who played an important role, we also look at these personalities and what their motivations for getting involved in the process leading us to independence. Thank you very, very much, Kirk, again. And thank you to our other three presenters, Dr. Bharat, Dr. Samaru, and Ms. Leela Ramdeen. At this point in time, I'd like to open the floor for your questions and your comments. And as always, we will ask that you keep your comments and your questions respectful, please. As you know, our meeting is being recorded live. It will be uploaded later after editing on YouTube permanently. And we would really appreciate it if you can show us that you want to ask a question or make a comment by raising your electronic hand. If you look to the base of your screen, you will see the reactions button. Just click on that, click on the electronic hand, and then I'll be able to call on you. So I'm not seeing any hands at this point in time. I would take the opportunity to ask a question, if I may. And is Dr. Samaru available? I'm not seeing him there. But okay, so let me ask this question to Dr. Bharat. Dr. Bharat, you said that Kapildeo was a barrister, mathematician, an illustrious Trinidadian who was not really recognized for his role in independence. And my question to you is this: did the PNM prevent it, or did Kapildeo himself stymie his own progress? Can you please unmute your mic? Dr. Bharat, you need to unmute your mic. We're not hearing you, sir. Just click on your screen at Dr. Bharat, we're not hearing you. Robin, can you assist? Oh, I think he needs to step away. If anyone has a question, please go ahead and raise your hands while we wait for a response.
Can I throw in my piece? Yes.
Mr. Jagasa, yes, I see your hand up. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's take a question from Mr. Jagasa.
Well, maybe it's a comment. I served in the parliament as a parliamentary reporter in the 70s and in the 80s, right, in the Trinidad Guardian and Trinidad Express. And I can tell you that what I saw in the parliament, in the Senate, and in the in the other house was absolute contempt that the PNM had for the opposition. They had zero respect for the opposition. Whatever amendment the opposition made in the Senate or the House, the PNM automatically rejected it. Right? And even if they said that, look, it's grammatically correct to say this thing, right? The PNM rejected it. Eric Williams himself was the worst. He was the worst. he would sit down in the house, right? And he would turn his chair as far away from the opposition as he could, right? And would read the London Times. At times, when he didn't like what the opposition was saying, he would take off his hearing aid and put it on the desk to show he's not listening to them. This is a follow-up on what Mr. Megu said, that Eric Williams had zero respect for the opposition from the very beginning. And it's a strange thing that this man went to Oxford. This man studied history, right? And he was such a stupid man, such a stupid politician, that he chose to make politics, make national politics, black people politics. And he ignored the other half of the country, the Indians, and centralized all power within himself. And when you see what happened before the election in 61 election, the PNM was defeated by the by the DLP in the federal election. The PNM went into a panic. They were crying in Bali Jail, "Oh God, what we could do? What we could do?" And when they were defeated in the county council election the following year, the PNM went into a total panic, and they decided to cheat in the elections. They brought in the crooked voting machine, they gerrymandered the boundaries, and they imported, by my count, over 200,000 small island, Africans. And they came to Trinidad and they were given voting cards, and then they were given houses and jobs and so on. He totally screwed the country by bringing in these people. I call them junk immigrants. Nobody else would have taken them because they had no social skills, no educational skills, nothing to bring to Trinidad and Tobago. And even so, the PNM was so scared, leading up to the 61 election, by the DLP with their great performance and so on, that Eric Williams, quite frankly, decided to pull out his thugs, the Marabuntas, and they started beating up the PNM, the DLP election campaign. I think Dr. Barrett will know that. He called state of emergency, in DLP areas, and he intimidated and, put endless pressure on the DLP. So as I said, he had zero respect for the opposition. He didn't care anything that they said, and that has contributed to this day. The present government and all following PNM governments have had the same attitude towards the DLP and the election. For example, Eric Williams never consulted opposition on the appointment of Chief Justice and all these other people, right? Even though he had promised to do so in the election, in the Independence Constitution. I'm sure the MPs, who are here will agree with me. Eric Williams just did what he liked, and it's impossible to understand why he, as a historian who saw so many things, who read history, was such a dunce at history, was such a dunce at politics, that he has squared the country. He and his legacy have destroyed Trinidad and Tobago and made it what it is, a joke. And that is what I found, from looking at Parliament as an objective reporter, that there was no democracy there. There was only aristocracy, right? And it has continued to this day. Thank you.
That's interesting, aristocracy. Good one to coin. Dr. Bharat.
Yes,
sir.
Yes, you can.
Okay, would you like me to repeat the question, or would you like to follow on?
Yeah, what's the question, madam?
So what I was asking is in reference to what you had said about Rudranath Kapildeo. You had said that he was an illustrious barrister and a mathematician, and he was not recognized at the time of independence in the way that Sir Solomon Hochoy was and in the way that Dr. Eric Williams was. So
Yes,
my question is,
yes.
did the PNM prevent him from being recognized, or was it Kapildeo himself who stymied his own recognition and progress?
Well, let me put it this way. It is the government who recognizes people and give them honors and whatnot. And I give you two clear examples. I personally took Dr. Kapildeo's application letter to the university because the university fell under my constituency in St. Augustine. Dr. Kapildeo informed me that he has applied for a post as the head of the mathematics department in the University of West Indies. I showed the book, the yearbook, which is printed with all the names of people who are on the staff and all the vacancies that are available for people to apply. When I showed the university authorities, the vice chancellor, I took it and I said, sir, this is Dr. Kapildeo who have asked me on his behalf to present a case that he has applied for the seat of the mathematics department, the head of mathematics. I showed them the vacancy, no name. So there was an advertisement for someone to fill that vacancy. I was made to understand that they were not aware. That's the university talking to me as a member of parliament for St. Augustine, under which the university fell. It was my therefore responsibility to take up anything that affected the university. And they told me, Dr. Kapildeo, as far as they were concerned, there were no vacancy for Dr. Kapildeo. Now, Dr. Kapildeo, it is in my, it is, let me show you something. This is my biography, which will be brought to the nation in a month or so. I could not have put it out in Trinidad because I had to come to England because of the COVID restriction. So I'll be in Trinidad on Monday morning, tomorrow morning. And as soon as I return, I'm going to have this book distributed free to the people whom I think needs it. So look out for this book and look out for what Kapildeo and look out what I have talked about. No one can deny that Dr. Kapildeo did not apply for the job at the university, and he was not accepted, and they said they knew nothing about it.
Yep.
Yes. Yes, carry on.
Oh, sorry. Dr. Mahaber, do you want to go ahead and ask that question?
Oh, I just wanted to I have read the biography of Kenneth Lala as well. In fact, I have it here. There's another book he wrote called there's another book that Dr. Kenneth Lala wrote in addition to his biography. And let me see. Right, this is it. Kenneth Lala. And in it, he mentions a lot about the violence inflicted upon DLP supporters during the campaigns. So if Dr. Bharat can tell us something, because he would have experienced some of that violence, if you can tell us some about that violence against the DLP supporters during the DLP meetings. Tell us something about that.
Yes, I'll be happy to give you my experience. Many people, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we're hearing you clearly.
Yes. So I was involved in many areas of violence in the campaigns and the meetings that were held. I will first tell you about the one in 1961 when Dr. Capelev fought the seat for St. Augustine. I was his campaign manager. And the Tunapuna constituency, which is opposite to the constituency of Dr. Capelev, we had a lot of Indo-Trinidadians who were supporters, especially in Mango Road, Green Street, and those places. And let me put it quite clear. I was involved in going to meet some of the people who were having problems. Since I was in Tunapuna, they sent and called me. Do you know what I saw with my own eyes? People were the people of African origin, and I presume they were PNM supporters. They were stopping the people from Mango Road from coming down to go and vote. They were even taking out the batteries from their cars. This has happened. And if there's anyone who is living at this time alive at Mango Road, can authenticate what I've just said. This is a fact. Now, I will tell you a personal part of my life. When I fought the election in 1966, I was the candidate who had to fight Mr. Badis Sagan Maraj. Now, Mr. Maraj and I were very close friends. I belonged to the Mahasabha. He was very close to my family. But when Mr. Badis Maraj heard that Dr. Bharat was going to fight the seat, he being the lone member for the PDP, he decided to challenge me for that seat. And history is ripe with occasions where I was intimidated, my home was firebombed, bottles were thrown in my house. Two supporters of mine from the St. Augustine in the constituency, their homes were bombed and fired. One is a now deceased Mr. Jill Jordan, a very prominent gardener in St. Augustine. Another gentleman who went to his toilet for 4 in the morning, as most Indians do, go early, they had to go to work. He was killed, one of my supporters. He was killed during the election. One of my supporters, who was against Badis Sagan Maraj at the time. So when we talk about violence and so on, and people don't understand, it actually happened to a candidate. I will now, in my book, those of you who are interested will find the story of the attempt on my life more than once. It's in my biography, which will be starting to be exposed when I come to Trinidad next week. So please don't say there was nothing violence in the election campaign. My cousin, my brother-in-law, on a meeting that I was supposed to attend to at in Piaco, people who were supporting me from Orapun thing stopped me and said, Dr. Bharat, don't go down to that area by the school, in CM school by the river there, because Mr. Maraj is having a meeting. Don't go because you know what's going to happen. Unfortunately, my brother-in-law decided to go around with the microphone because the election was the next couple of days. My brother-in-law took my car, and Badis people saw my car passing with stickers on the car. A couple of minutes after, a car passed very fast and overtook my brother-in-law who was in my car. When he reached the Silver Bridge, he was shot because they had cane at the time at the corner of the Silver Bridge. The person who fired the shot thought it was Dr. Bharat was being killed. When my brother-in-law arrived at St. Augustine, which is about 5 minutes away from the Silver Bridge, he came to me and said, "Oh, someone struck me on my shoulder. It seems to be a stone or a piece of bottle." A good friend of mine, Dr. Sinat, who lived opposite me in St. Augustine, I took my brother-in-law to him, and eventually Dr. Sinat referred him to Port of Spain General Hospital, where he had an operation where they removed the bullet. The next day, everybody was saying that Dr. Barrett is killed, Dr. Barrett was shot, Dr. Barrett, and there were big jubilations in the camp of the opposition, in my opponent's camp, because people told him, "We have killed Dr. Barrett." So you see, these are not things that I am making up. Read it in this book, printed by Dr. Prernath Gupta. Next week, next month, this will be shown around. If you're interested to get the facts, look into the book here, look inside this book here, where you'll see all the problems that we had about the shooting and the violence that took place in Trinidad and Tobago. So please, people, don't think that there were no violence. This is two areas on which I spoke, Mango Road and the killing of 2 of my supporters, bombing their homes. My house was being not firebombed, but stone repelted, glass were broken, bottles were thrown in my compound. And I was informed prior to these happening, "Dr. Barrett, please don't stay home. Trouble is going to happen tomorrow or tonight." These are the facts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So the violence was perpetrated irrespective of ethnicity.
Well, I don't know who were the people, but I would imagine that it is well accepted that the people were supporters of my opponent, Mr. Maraj.
Yeah.
I have no proof that they belong to any particular sector, but they were my supporters and their homes were bombed. So you can have your own conclusion on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Ray Menon, thank you so much for your patience. So go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Can you unmute? Robin, can you unmute Mr. Ray Menon, please? Okay, you should be able to speak now.
Hello, can you hear me?
We're hearing you now, yes.
Thanks. I just want to make 3 quick points. Originally from Singapore. I left Singapore 26 years ago. One of the panel members referred to Singapore's impressive figures. I beg to disagree. It's not everyone in Singapore has that kind of income per capita.
Mr. Manan, there's a bit of an echo when you're speaking. It's not coming across very clearly.
Do you want me to repeat what I have just said?
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. One of the members of the panel referred to impressive growth rates of Singapore, $78,000 or something like that. I left Singapore 36 years ago, and I'm still in touch with people in Singapore. I would like to remind the gentleman that not everyone in Singapore has that amount of money per capita per year. It's at this point. The second point I'd like to make is I get the distinct impression that the PNM had contempt for democracy. I've read bits and pieces. I'm not from the West Indies, I'm from Southeast Asia. I've read bits and pieces about the West Indies out of curiosity and out of my intellectual pursuits on the Indian diaspora. I've heard about Dr. Chigan and
Mr. Manan, I'm sorry, I'm really not hearing you. Is it just me? Kirk, are you hearing what he's saying?
Not the second part.
No.
Yeah, I heard the first part about the GDP in Singapore. And I'd like to answer, because I know Singapore pretty well. I've been there a few times, and I would like to engage the question.
Okay, Mr. Manan, just a little bit louder, please, if you don't mind.
What I was about to say is that the PN, just as some of the people on the panel have said that the PNM had contempt for democracy, the ruling party in Singapore had the same contempt for democracy in Singapore as the PNM. And can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're talking about the People's Action Party and Lee Kuan Yew's
They have been in power since 1959.
It's very similar.
Till now.
Very similar.
And for example, at least in Trinidad, there have been 2 breaks where the opposition has formed government. In Singapore, we have not had any change in government at all. And the contempt they had for Indians and also for, in fact, Lee Kuan Yew one said that the Indians are a fractious people and no Indian can become Prime Minister of Singapore. And this is a man who was educated in Cambridge, with his law degree there, supposed to govern first. That was the kind of ethnocentrism that he displayed.
Yep.
And so one has to be careful to talk about Singapore being a model. That's one point I'd like to make. The other thing is that I think Kirk made the point that the British wanted to get out of the West Indies, more specifically Trinidad and Tobago, but that was not just there. Also from Southeast Asia, the formation of Malaysia was a ploy for the British to get out of Southeast Asia. The British were beginning to feel that colonialism didn't pay. It was best to get out quickly. And that was the mindset that they had. And the reason I think why they stayed on in Guyana is because they were frightened of Chile Chicken remaining in power. And they had their new interests in mind. That's why they stayed on till 66. Point I'd like to make is that British bequeathed power in most of the colonies to the elites. In the case of Malaysia, it's the aristocracy. In Singapore, to the Chinese aristocracy. They thought we continue what we had in mind. This was the model that we had. We've got to be quite careful in these models as for us to pursue. Just a word of caution, that's all. I know very little about West Indies. Just one quick point. I've read a fair bit of C.L.R. James, his book, The Black Jacobins. It's the only book I've read. There was a falling out between C.L.R. James and Eric Williams. What was the cause of that? I still do not know, because I live in Australia now. And basically, I only heard that there was a falling out. Can anyone enlighten me?
Yes.
What the reason
yes. I can take all 3 of those questions. The first thing about Lee Kuan Yew, that's a very interesting point, because Eric Williams kind of saw himself as a strong man, like Lee Kuan Yew saw himself as a strong man. And they had a certain contempt for democracy and a certain, and were of an authoritarian bent. And interestingly, up to 1981, our GDP per capita were about the same with Singapore for those 20 years. And it really started to diverge in the 1980s. But I certainly do not advocate the Singapore model for Trinidad and Tobago. And in Singapore, I know, the Chinese dominance, it's almost like a Chinese supremacy in a certain way in Singapore. I'm very aware of that. And I mean, when they broke off from Malaysia in 1965, it had to do with the whole Malay question and whatnot. So in no way am I advocating a Singaporean model for Trinidad and Tobago at all. But the material benefits and so forth, I mean, we should be far more materially advanced than Singapore, I'm saying. We have oil and gas. Singapore is the largest oil refinery, one of the largest, most profitable oil refining industries in the world, and it doesn't have any oil. and our prime minister shut down Petrotrin here, saying, oh, well, we have to import oil. Well, Singapore's industry is based on importing oil. And this kind of foolish, terrible economic destruction of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm not saying we should follow necessarily Singapore's model, but we should be up there. There's no reason why we shouldn't be a Dubai, a Qatar, a Singapore, a Hong Kong, one of these countries. But it's because of the PNM. But so that's one point. The second point, we can't get too much into it, but the ethnic strategy of the British is very, very important, whether it be divide and rule, and favoring one group over another. And you see this in the former Gamitia countries, I'll call them, Trinidad, Guyana, Mauritius, Fiji, for example. It's like in Trinidad, they said they don't want proportional representation. They're totally, which is what the Indian Association of Trinidad and Tobago called for, and they said, if we don't get that, then we want the country partitioned. That's what they called for. And Britain said, no, not at all. But then Guyana, they said, no, we don't want first past the post. You have to have proportional representation. And why? It wasn't principle. They wanted the PNC in power in Guyana, and they wanted the PNM in power here. And same thing in Fiji, and so forth. So the British picked their favorites, who they wanted to, when they left, who they wanted to be in power and who they did. Just like in Iraq when they put the Sunni there over the Shia and so forth. So that was part of British imperialism, and so our independence was also colored by that. But I didn't necessarily get into that in our presentation. And then finally, just quickly about CLR James and Eric Williams. James really had a different vision. Eric Williams is all about centralization. CLR James wasn't for that. He actually formed another party out of the DLP, which and Stephen Maraj from the DLP, the Workers and Farmers Party, whose some of first members were Bastio Pandey and Trevor Sudama, and who the party, the opposition, and who I'm the public relations officer for. We are the inheritors of that party that CLR James formed after he left the PNM and formed with them. So just some information there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mikiu. Zaira Simone has a question. Zara, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Okay, yeah, I'm just sort of interested in hearing from each of the presenters on their thoughts of sovereignty. What does that mean for you all in this current political moment? What is sovereignty?
Thank you, Zaira. Can I invite Dr. Samaru to respond first, and then I'll ask Leela Ramdeen to respond?
You hearing me? Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yeah, my own concept of sovereignty is, a society in which the vast majority of the people, in whatever way they feel that the country should be governed. And I'm afraid that's not what is happening in the Caribbean now. It is just a small elite. It is just a small elite that decides what is happening and what is going to happen in the politics, in the economy, and so on. So the fact that the vast majority of the people of the Caribbean are not being involved in any kind of discussion, about the question of sovereignty is ominous. It's ominous, and what I see over the next decade or so is increasing unrest, increasing disturbances in the Caribbean. And I think the reason is, as it was in 1937, that the popular voices were not being heard. And at that time, we were really ruled by a small oligarchy of mainly Europeans and European Creoles. And that oligarchy has now been replaced by a local middle class made up of Afros and Indos and, white people in the region. And they're the ones who control. So that a local elite has replaced the colonial elite. And I think there's going to be a very serious revolt against that local elite that have replaced the colonial elite, and the local populations throughout the Caribbean wish now to be more and more involved in the process of governance. And unless that is resolved, then we are going to have increasing unrest, as we had in 1937, as we had here in 1970, as we had here in 1990. So there's urgent need to involve entire Caribbean populations in the whole question of sovereignty, who governs, and that is not being done. And I think the omens are very ominous for the Caribbean.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out. That's very important, Dr. Samaru. Ms. Ramdeen,
yes.
would you like to respond?
My article in Trinidad Guardian I write every Saturday is entitled "What Use Are We Making of Our Independence?" which is a question Dr. Williams had asked, what use will we make of our independence? And Dr. Samaru, Professor Samaru is right. In my article, I focus on the fact that really the poor are getting poorer. And I remember when I was small, my father had a book, Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. And in it, there was a saying, when the rich are too rich and the poor are too poor, there are ways. And that is my fear, that there are ways. The amount of protests we're seeing in Trinidad and Tobago, the amount of murders from the, in my article, I said, I wrote it on the 19th, and the 19th of August, there were 44 murders in Trinidad and Tobago. We have no plan. Governance is about, as Professor said, listening to the voice of the people. And I've always said, no matter what size of cake we have in terms of our natural resources and the resources of the nation, there should be more equity. The inequality is growing. When you look at how people live, we are talking about integral human development. I was the chair of the Catholic Commission for Social Justice. Integral human development means the development of each person on every dimension of the person. Nobody should be left behind. But sadly, there are people, a small group, as he said, who are, they're hell-bent on just raking it in for themselves and their families and their friends. And I'm afraid the poor are not going to take that much longer. So that's my fear. Sovereignty is about everybody. You know how many consultations I've been to? Oh my gosh, they say they want consultation, but who listens? When the information comes back, who listens? So there's no real sovereignty. There's no real sharing of power. Good governance is what we're after, and we don't have that.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our final question now from Dr. Indira Ramprasad. Go ahead, please, Indira.
Thank you very much, Shalima. Colleagues, I want to commend you all for this panel. I think it's very, very insightful, and I want to commend all the speakers. I particularly like the presentation from Dr. Megu, which brought home, some of the tragedies of the current constitution that we have. But I think it's time to reflect and to try to understand from what we've heard today about the lessons learned. The lessons learned from pre-independence, throughout the independence period, and the current contemporary period, and the extent to which Indians themselves have contributed to some of the problems that we have, particularly at the political level, because we see disunity and divisiveness in the party politics throughout history. While the PNM has remained a homogeneous monolithic party, for the most part, the opposition parties, which have been predominantly Indian for most of the history, we've had two periods of rule, have been divided. And, I did an article on Indians in politics and shown these divisions. Dr. Bharat has also highlighted the division with himself and Mr. Badisagan Miraj. And I think this is something that that we need to learn from and build on. We have to work on it, because even today we're seeing when people get vexed in the Indian party, they leave and they form their own. That's the first tendency, to leave and they form their own. It's the Indian party that is divided. not the PNM. And that is the only way we have learned. The only way to win an election is to form coalitions and to get together. In 1995, it happened because it was what contributed certainly was the 150th anniversary of Indian arrival in Trinidad, and Indians rallied fought together. We saw it again 2010. There was a coalition of all the forces coming together. So this unity is not working in favor of the Indians. And the independence period has taught us that. The post-independence period has taught us that. And I think this is a valuable lesson that we have to take away from this forum today. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much. That's an excellent note on which to end. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being here with us, and especially to our presenters, Dr. Bharat, Dr. Samaru, Ms. Leela Ramdeen, Dr. Meghu. Thank you very, very much for all that you've shared. Very insightful and always enlightening. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to share your knowledge and expertise and experience with us. So at this point in time, I'll say thank you all very much for being with us today, and I'll now hand you over to our chair, Shakira, to close off today's program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shalama, for being a wonderful moderator. And thank you all for being here and taking the time to listen and be informed. Thank you especially to the presenters. As I've said before, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, where you can publish your books and reports. Please remember, you can kindly give us your suggestions or donations, and you can contact Dr. Mahabir for further information on that. Thank you also to the advisory and planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir. Thank you to our IT manager behind the scenes, Ravin Ramsingh, who has been recording the program and will edit and upload it to our website and to YouTube permanently for posterity. Our next topic for Sunday will be the impact of laws on Indians in the diaspora, from indentureship to independence. Please like, share, and follow on our Facebook page also. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyabad.
Thank you all very much for participating in whatever form. Thank you, Dr. John Bharat. At age 95, you are still up, so it was wonderful. Anybody want to say? Ray, you can probably talk now since we won't be recording in a few